Hey everybody. So it's been a while since I've made a tutorial, but that's because it was May, and May is our big sweeps ratings period, so I was super busy. But what I wanted to do was revisit this shot again because there was one important part of this shot that I didn't have time to go into on my last tutorial. If you can remember, this woman, that's the original shot, and this is what we graded it into. Her skin was a bit rough here on her cheek, so what I did was I blurred it. I tracked this shape to her face as her face is moving. That shape is tracking with her, and I blurred the skin inside that window. Now, when you do that, it makes people's skin a lot better. However, it completely destroys any kind of grain or any kind of compression that was in the original video. So, particularly on people's faces, when you do this, it tends to look like an out-of-focus blob on their face. And the reason why it looks like that is because by blurring it, you've destroyed all that grain structure, or in this case, compression structure. So here's how I go about regraining stuff I've blurred. So what I do is I turn on the highlight mode by doing this, and you can see that's the little blotchy part of skin that I've blurred out. I've taken the matte output of that node and piped it into this node. I'm going to turn it back on, and I had to invert the matte down here. Node 10 is just going to affect the inside of this blur area here. I can do that. Now, this is Resolve Light. I'm going to click on this node. I'm going to hit Open Effects. These Resolve Effects won't work because it's the free version of the program, Resolve Light. But I also, on this machine, I have BCC Boris Continuum Complete. I can come down here and click on BCC Film Grain. I'll show you the two ways to do it. First is the relatively easy way. The second way is much more complicated, and it's much more like a visual effects artist would do it. And I have a feeling it would be a lot easier and more interactive in the latest version of Resolve with Fusion built in. But the beauty of these techniques that I'm about to show you is you can use them on any platform. I'm just going to show you the principle and the theory behind it. And obviously, I'll show you the practical nuts and bolts of doing it in Resolve. So I'm going to take this BCC Film Grain plugin and just drag it on top of that shot. Now you can see right away, it put a lot of grain in there, and it's only on this part of her face that we masked out. The grain plugin defaults to monochromatic. Grain can be split out into red, green, and blue channels, and we'll look at that one next. For whatever reason, Boris decided if you're doing monochromatic grain, the quick and dirty way, the red slider is the one you're going to want to adjust. I'll turn the grain node off, play it down. You can see right here, it's kind of like a big mushy blob in her face. I'm going to turn the grain node back on. See, off, on, off, on. I'm going to play it down with the grain on. That's a bit heavy-handed, so I'm just going to rewind it. You can adjust the size of the grain. This is pretty small right now. It's as small as it can go. It's at 0, and you can increase it. And it looks like it's disappearing, but it's not. The little grain squares are getting bigger. I'm going to play it down. That's probably a little bit too big. What I'm looking at in this picture, I'm looking at her hair over here. This might be tough to see on YouTube because YouTube's going to compress it some more. But I'm looking at the grain and the noise here and the grain on her eyes. So I'm going to try this at 1 and play it down. You can see the grain is a lot bigger, kind of matching the grain up here and the grain in her eye. But it's still a bit much. So I am going to turn down the amount to, let's try 10. And now if you look really closely, I don't know what this is going to look like on YouTube, but there is some noise in that part of her face that I blurred out. I'm trying to match the compression and the noise that was in the picture signal already. Let me rewind it. This is with the node off. Not much there. This is with the node on. Very slight adjustment, but I put some noise and grain back into that blurry part of her face. That part of her face is no longer just some out-of-focus blob. There's some noise there, there's some grain there, there's some compression there. It looks a little more natural than this. That looks a little weird because it's too perfect. So here's the second way to do it. That's the quick and dirty way, and honestly, for television broadcast, probably good enough. But this is how I was trained to do it for visual effects. I'm going to turn the monochromatic node off, and I'm just going to reset all these. Now, I will have control over the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. I can make more or less grain in each channel, and I can also make the grain size bigger and smaller in each channel. And that's going to come into play in a second. I will admit this is not the best shot to show this more advanced regraining technique. There just wasn't a lot of noise and grain in her face to begin with. But like I said, this is the theory behind it. I'm going to move this one down here so I'll have a little more real estate to work with. And the first thing you want to do is add the regrain node. But after that, you're going to have to come up here and add a special resolve node, and it's called Add Splitter Combiner Node. I'm going to push that, and we're going to get this mishigash. This is what it's doing. This splitter node is splitting the channel out into a red channel and a green channel and a blue channel. So if I go on to my highlight mode and I can click on the red channel, this is the red channel output. Why is it black and white, Mark? You said it was the red channel. Not 100% sure. I'll have to Google that for you. And this combiner node takes these red, green, and blue channels and recombines it back into a color image. So let's have a look. Again, I'm going to go into the highlight mode. I have the grain channel on right here. Node 10 is adding the grain, and you can see it's just on the mat. This is the red channel. You can see the grain we've added right here, and you can also see the noise, the compression, and the grain that is living in the red channel only. So let me play it down. Our grain is really big up here. The compression is really big. There's not that much on her face. Why is that? Doesn't matter your race or complexion, your skin tone is going to fall right in here. Camera manufacturers understand this. When they make compression schemes for video cameras, they don't compress the red channel very much at all. Because if you put a lot of compression in the red channel, that's where skin tones live. So this part is noisy. This couch is kind of noisy. Her scarf is very noisy. Her face, her skin tone, minus the part I put in here, not so noisy. I'm going to click on the node where I'm adding my grain. I'm going to take it out of highlight mode, and I'm going to put my cursor right here on node 10, and I'm going to come in here, and for some reason, it always wants to go back to monochromatic mode. Don't know why. I'm going to turn that off, and now I have my adjustments for red, green, and blue. Don't care about blue and green for the moment. I just care about red. Monitoring this, I will admit, is a bit clunky. On other systems, it works a lot better, but this is how I would go about matching the grain on each individual channel. I'm going to turn my highlight node on. I'm going to click on my red channel. There's my red grain. Not exactly matching the grain that's around it. I have too much of it, and it's way too small. So I'm going to click back on my node here where the grain is. And this is, I think, is a bug in the software. It keeps turning my green and blue channels off. You keep having to toggle on and off the monochromatic button here. I'm going to make my grain size bigger. I'm going to try 3. And I'm going to go back to my black and white mode, play it down. So if you see, I've got some big grain chunks here. And I'm looking at the compression in her hair. It seems to be the right size. Probably still a bit much, so I'm going to go back to this node. I like the size, but I think it's a bit too much. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to put that on about, 7. And I'm going to switch back over to my red node. Looking a little bit better. The size of the grain looks right, and the amount of the grain looks right. Again, these are very subtle adjustments. So now I'm going to switch over to my green channel. So green amount is at 0, green grain size is at 0. Red was at 7, seemed pretty good. I'll punch in 7. And size, what do we have for red size? 3. I'll try 3 for the green grain size. And I will come over to my green node, which is here, number 17. Play it down. Let's see what our grain size is here. So this grain up here, this noise looks a lot smaller than the red noise in size. Come down here. That looks a little too big. I'm going to reduce my green size to 1 and go back to my green output and play that down. So I'm looking at the size of the grain here. It looks like the same size as the green grain up here, but it still looks like a bit much. Let me go back into this node. Green amount, I'm going to try that at 4. Pop back over to this node, rewind it. Looking a little bit better. I'm looking at the grain size up here. Looks like it's the same size. I'm looking at the amount of green grain. And it's looking pretty good. So I'll rewind it to the beginning. And lastly, I will have a look at the blue grain. Remember what I said about camera manufacturers not compressing the red channel very much? Now, the green channel has a little bit of compression on it. Let me go back to the green channel. But these blocks look smaller than the red channel blocks, which look much bigger. See how the red looks pretty big? The green looks pretty small? That's in the background. And when you look on her face, there's almost no compression on her face. And in green, there's a little bit of noise. Why is this? Well, camera manufacturers obviously did not want much compression, if any compression, on red, because that's where skin tones live. But they have to compress it somewhere. So they compress the green channels a little bit more than the red channels, because green is what we use nowadays for green screens. And if you have a lot of compression in the green channel, your chroma keys aren't going to be so good. And now let's take a look at the third channel, the blue channel. Wowzers. Lots of compression there. Let's take a look, play it down. Look at her face, look at her hair. There's a lot of compression and a lot of noise in the blue channel. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, there just always was a little bit more grain and noise in a blue channel. It's just how the color signals broke out. There's probably a nerdy engineering reason for it. I'm not 100% sure why, but blue is just naturally noisy. Now, you combine that with the fact that camera manufacturers have got to compress something somewhere, right? They can't compress the red channel because that's where skin tone lives. They really can't compress the green channel, although they do a little bit, because that's where we do our chroma keys. Where are they going to compress stuff? Well, they're going to compress it more in the blue channel. So blue gets the short end of the stick. So I'm going to rewind this to the beginning and look at all that compression and all that noise in the blue channel. Lots of compression. Lots of noise. There's like these lines here. I don't even know what that's all about. I'm going to go back into my node where I have my grain. So that's red grain size right about here. You can see the outline of the square. That's blue grain size, probably about the same size. I'm going to make my blue grain size 7, which is the same size as my red. But there's a lot of compression going on in the blue channel. So I'm going to start that at 10 to see what we get. So you can see that noise and compression starting to come back in her cheek area. Let's turn this off and then go back over to here. Now this blue channel is so noisy that there's some grain in there already, even though I blurred it. But we can put some more in there. I can turn that back on, come back over to the blue channel. And you can see I've added more noise into it. But I want even more noise. Let's see what we can do here. Blue grain amount. Let's try that at 30. Let's really push it. Come back over to here. So there is more blue noise and grain in that picture. So when you're all done, I'm going to add a node here just so I don't get confused with the shape I drew around her. And I'm going to play it down. And again, it's hard to see because it's not playing back in real time and it's compressed on YouTube. But trust me, there is some more grain structure on her face there. There is some more noise there. It looks more realistic. Sometimes when you regrain shots like this, it will actually have the effect of adding some sharpness back into the spot that you just blurred out. This wasn't the case, unfortunately, in this shot. So that's 2 ways to regrain. After going through the whole rigmarole, I like the quick and dirty way better. I don't feel like I had enough control in the resolve. For my money, I would do it the first way. I mean, if you're working on a visual effect for a film, you'd probably have to do it this way. The visual effects supervisor would get all cranky pants about it, and he'd want it done this way. For television promos like I'm doing for commercial work, you could probably get away with the quick and dirty way using the monochromatic and just trying to match it up. So I hope that makes sense to you guys, and happy correcting, everybody.